Back in Ramadi, Islamic State-related websites showed video of heavy fighting from the weekend, and the group said it was executing apostates, a reference to captured Iraqi troops. Joining me now to talk about the battle against the Islamic State is retired Colonel Derek Harvey. He's a former special advisor to the commander of U.S. forces in Iraq and now director for the Global Initiative on Civil Society and Conflict at the University of South Florida. And Vali Nasser, a former State Department senior advisor. He's now dean of the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Vali Nasser, how significant is the fall of Ramadi?
I think symbolically it's very significant. After all, Ramadi is an important city in Iraq. It's the capital of Anbar, and it challenges the U.S. narrative that ISIS is being downgraded, is being dismantled. And I think psychologically it boosts their position in the region, it helps their recruitment, and it suggests that they are far from on their back heel.
Derek Harvey, the Pentagon spokesman said today not to read too much into this. What do you read into it?
Well, I think it clearly shows that the Islamic State is not losing, which means that we're not winning, and we need to rethink our approach, how we're resourcing this effort, and our determination to assist the Iraqi security forces and bolster Prime Minister Abadi. I think most importantly that Prime Minister Abadi could become weakened and further isolated, which would undermine the major political effort that we've had in play in Iraq. We've invested a lot in him, and his opponents are going to use this as another arrow to undermine his political stature in the country.
There's the political piece here, Vali Nasser, and there's the military piece. How much of this came to pass because of the inherent weakness of the Iraqi military?
I think it's mostly a result of the weakness of the Iraqi military. The Iraqi military collapsed when ISIS took Mosul. There was an effort to shore it up, and I think that effort was exaggerated. Largely, a lot of the fighting was done by Shia militias in places like Tikrit. And now we again see that the Iraqi security forces are not up to task to resist ISIS. At least they can control the whole of Iraq. And when they go in one direction, that gives room to ISIS to move into new areas.
We heard this weekend, Colonel Harvey, about the U.S. victory over a leader of ISIS, which was the White House was very anxious to disseminate that information in order to make the case, the continuing case, that there has been some victory here. Do you see that?
I really don't. You know, taking out a leader who is readily replaceable, I think, in my judgment, is not a major factor in this campaign. You know, we've had these types of takedowns of leaders at mid-level and senior level before, and they are replaced over time. The most important thing from this action over the weekend against Abu Sayyaf was, in fact, the intelligence collection, the thumb drives, the computers, the data that can be exploited to go after networks and leadership down the road.
Do you agree with that about Abu Sayyaf?
I agree. I think ISIS's power in the region comes from its ability to show that it's a viable force, that it can capture territory, that it can stand up to the U.S., and that it's the only, if you would, Sunni force capable of taking on Baghdad and Tehran. And all of this has been reinforced in Ramadi. The fact that they lost the leader means that he's been martyred. That's expected in war, and I think the fact that they were able to capture Ramadi right after the death of that leader, plays to their narrative.
Let me stay with you, Vali Nasser, for a moment, because I'm also curious about whether you think that the U.S. could be doing more, or whether this is something, and perhaps to the extent of actually overtly collaborating with Iran.
Well, if our goal is to defeat ISIS in the very short run, it cannot be done through Iraqi security forces. Standing up a viable army that can control all the territory in Iraq and be able to fight ISIS is going to take time. So if we want to defeat ISIS in the short run, either the U.S. has to do more of the fighting, or it has to much more overtly and explicitly collaborate with the Shia militias that are backed by Iran, who have proven to be the more effective force fighting ISIS.
Derek Harvey, is that a non-starter, collaborating even in a subtle fashion with Iran?
Well, I think it will mobilize more Sunni Arab resistance, not just those that are key to support ISIS anyway. And I think it will put at risk our influence and an independent Iraq down the road. It threatens to make Iraq more of a client state of Tehran if we are not very careful about how Iranian influence with these popular mobilization units and Shia militias is calibrated.
Let me ask you, and sticking with you, Colonel Harvey, how strong is the political support on the ground for ISIS, which makes it maybe a little bit more difficult to take on?
I don't think anyone is certain about how strong the political support is. What's clear is there's real frustration and still anger with Baghdad. Keep in mind that Ramadi has been under pressure from ISIS for 16 months, and they've been asking for help. The tribal leaders have been asking for help. The ISF, the Iraqi security forces, were asking for reinforcements and support continuously over this time, and it was not forthcoming from Baghdad. That creates animosity towards Baghdad, which is tapped into throughout the Sunni Arab region.
Molly Nasser, we hear about what's happening in Tikrit, what's happened in Ramadi, what's happened in Mosul, what's happened in Kobani, and it feels like a few steps forward, several steps back, and we're right where we started. Am I wrong in that reading, or is there something else that we're doing wrong that means we can never make permanent progress?
Well, we cannot make permanent progress based on the kind of situation we have on the ground. So Iraqi security forces cannot defeat ISIS. They can gather and push ISIS out of one town and city, and ISIS moves somewhere else. Ultimately, what is required is denying the entire territory of Iraq to ISIS and being able to push ISIS out of all the territory that it holds without enabling it to move into another territory. Iraqi security forces cannot do that. Even the Shia militias by themselves cannot do that in the short run. In the longer run, the U.S. has to invest in building up Iraqi security forces to be able to control Iraq. But in the short run, there is no immediate solution to this. So we're playing a game of whack-a-mole with ISIS. We hit them in Tikrit, and they move on to Ramadi. You hit them on Ramadi, they're going to move somewhere else. And at any rate, the Iraqi security forces right now are not a real strong option. If our goal is to defeat ISIS, you have to see what you have to work with. And right now what you have to work with is actually the Shia militias.
Derek Harvey, does that mean that ISIS is now has to be treated as a long-term enemy?
Well, it clearly has to be treated as a long-term enemy, but I think we're also overestimating the capability and fighting strength of the popular mobilization units of the Shia militias. They are not that good, and they demonstrated that at the outskirts of Tikrit and in other places, when they overwhelmingly overmatch Sunni fighters in a small town or not a built-up area, they do well. But in street fighting, urban fighting against an organized defense, they've demonstrated they are not very good.
Derek Harvey at the University of South Florida and Vali Nasser, the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Many of the images that first called the nation's attention to the protests in Ferguson, Missouri last summer were ones like these. Video of the police force responding in strength and sometimes resembling a small army, including officers clad in military gear, pointing rifles at the crowds and using tear gas. The clashes in Baltimore and New York City have reinforced those images as well. Much of this equipment was made available to local police departments in the years after the 9/11 attacks. But today, President Obama announced a ban on the sale or transfer of certain military-style gear to local police, including tracked armored vehicles, grenade launchers, and firearms of .50 caliber or higher. He spoke in Camden, New Jersey.
We've seen how militarized gear can sometimes give people a feeling like
that's right.
There's an occupying force as opposed to a force that's part of the community that's protecting them and serving them.
About time you called
can alienate and intimidate local residents and send the wrong message.
That's
so we're going to prohibit some equipment made for the battlefield that is not appropriate for local police departments.
That's right.
A closer look at what's behind this decision and its potential impact. Philadelphia Police Commissioner Charles Ramsey is the co-chair of the President's Task Force on Policing, which has been working on these issues. and Richard Berry. He's the president of the International Association of Police Chiefs. He's a former police chief of the city of Lake Mary, Florida, and now he's chief of police for the University of Central Florida. And gentlemen, we thank you both. Chief Ramsey, let me start with you. What the president did today was one of really picking up on one of the recommendations that the task force you led have been leading, the recommendations you made. Why is this necessary?
Well, I think it's clearly necessary that we be able to, as police, justify any equipment that we receive, not just from the military, but also using federal grants to get some of the equipment. I mean, obviously we need a broad range of equipment. Police handle everything from missing children to active shooters, and obviously the kind of equipment that you would need to respond effectively varies a great deal. But some military equipment is more appropriate for the field of battle, not the urban streets of our cities.
That's right.
Chief Berry, you agree that it was this is the right thing to do to ban access to this some
That's
kinds
right.
of military-style equipment?
Don't get scared.
I think everyone is looking for a balance. We at the International Association of Chiefs of Police, we understand that we have to have the support of the community, but at the same time, as Chief Ramsey says, law enforcement is dealing with lots of new threats. 20 years ago, who ever heard of an active shooter? Now we hear about it all the time. So we have to make sure that we balance the needs of the public and the safety of the officers and those that are sworn to protect the public, and that's what we're trying to do here.
So, Chief Ramsey, how do you think about achieving that balance, and how much of this has to do with equipment, and how much of it has to do with the training of the police themselves, the culture that they work in?
Well, I think most of it has to do with training, but probably the most important aspect of this is policy. At what point in time is it appropriate to deploy certain types of equipment? And there need to be standards in place, policies in place to guide the officers so they have clear direction. And I think that we have seen some instances where certain types of equipment were deployed, in my opinion, at a point in time when it wasn't really necessary, and that's what creates a lot of the problems. So it's training, it's policy, it's all those things combined that I think we need to make sure are in place, and I think that the government is right in seeing to it that we do have those things in place before providing that kind of equipment to an agency.
Chief Ramsey, what's an example of a time and place when it was the wrong thing was used?
Well, when you're talking about mass demonstrations, depending on the crowd, and we're not talking about all-out riots like we saw the first day in Baltimore when things really spiraled out of control, and even later in Ferguson when things spiraled out of control. But when it first started, I know that I was in Washington, D.C., and now Philadelphia. We try to start off without using certain types of equipment. We have them available, but it's certainly out of sight. We don't want to incite a crowd. So I think it's the way in which you deploy, depending on what it is you're responding to and what you're dealing with. And people have a right to protest. And if you show up with riot gear and heavy armored vehicles and so forth when people are out just simply peacefully demonstrating, you're going to get exactly that. You're going to wind up with a riot more than likely.
Chief Berry, same question. How do you strike the right balance? How much of this is the equipment, and how much of it is the training and the approach, the culture of the police force?
Well, a couple of important things come to light. Number one, what we know is that 90% of what law enforcement agencies across this country have received from the military had nothing to do with tanks and guns and things like that. The majority of the equipment that we have received are radios and equipment, things that help us do our job in the community. So I think we need to make sure we understand that. Secondly, is training is absolutely an essential part to responding to any type of situation. So I agree with Chief Ramsey. It's about training, it's about policy, but it's also about having that just in case you need it, because you just don't know when a crowd is going to go bad. A perfect example was in Waco, Texas yesterday. They certainly didn't expect the shootout that they had there. So it's a real combination, and that's the delicate balance with trying to be a police chief in this country, is to make sure you have your people prepared, you have the equipment that you need, at the same time not coming off like you're trying to intimidate the community that you serve.
Chief Ramsey, I'd like you to respond to that and also address, I mean, how much of a problem do we have in this country right now between police and communities who feel that they are just not understood and not respected by the police?
Well, it depends on the city, the relationships that police and community have. Obviously, there are some areas and some pockets in many of our cities where relationships are strained. That's not necessarily new. I've started my policing career in 1968 in Chicago, and we had areas of our city where, no one would talk to you, provide information, and so forth. I mean, it was tension between police and community. Now, we've engaged in community policing for the last 3 decades at least, and I think we've done a very, very good job of establishing relationships and also reducing crime. But we have left some communities behind. There still remains some tension, and we need to really be sure that we build bridges, that we close those gaps with those communities as well. And they tend to be communities of color and communities that are challenged in many ways with poverty, lack of educational opportunities of quality and things of that nature. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but the community has to work alongside us. This isn't just a police issue. It takes the community also reaching out to us as we reach out to them.
And Chief Berry, finally, how much of a problem do you think the country has? How much of the country has this kind of a problem that we're talking about? And to what extent do you think banning these so-called militaristic style pieces of equipment will make a difference?
Well, I don't think what the government has banned will have that big of an impact. What our concern is really the stuff that they have, equipment that they've limited, and we're waiting to see how the rules are going to roll out, how we justify the use and things of that nature. Certainly, when it comes to community policing, that is a key part of the solution. However, we know there's a lot of issues going on in our communities, from poverty to mental health issues. There's a host of issues that are going on, and the IACP for over 20 years has called for a national summit on criminal justice, the entire system, and we're hoping that all these things combined will lead to that commission to take a look at the whole system and how we can better handle the delivery of service to our communities and treat our people and men and women who work for us and the citizens with respect. So there's a lot of work ahead. I think it's also important to note that there are a lot of communities across this country that are doing a great job, and law enforcement is doing a great job. There was a Reuters poll that was done in January of this year, and 3/4 of the people that responded to that survey said they have confidence in their local police department. So there's a lot of good things being done across this country. We just need to continue to enhance that and deliver the service that our communities expect.
Chief Richard Berry, who is the president of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and Chief Charles Ramsey of Philadelphia. We thank you both.
Thank you.
50 years ago today, President Lyndon Johnson announced the creation of Head Start, the government program designed to support low-income children and families. In our latest American Graduate Report, the NewsHour's April Brown has the story of how it's changed the lives of millions of children. That's part of a public media initiative funded by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
My salad grows in a garden.
In Lisette Steinwald's preschool class in Silver Spring, Maryland, the theme of what it takes to make a salad can be found in a variety of activities throughout the day, from reading to a little show and tell.
Can you say cucumber? Cucumber.
The 4- and 5-year-olds she teaches in the Head Start program at Montgomery Knowles Elementary School spend 3.5 hours with her every day during the school year.
Curve it around and slide to the right to make a number 2.
They're learning skills designed to ease the transition to kindergarten and are following in the footsteps of more than 30 million children who have gone through the program in the United States over the past 5 decades.
Head Start. A Head Start for poverty's children.
Head Start got its start in the summer of 1965 as one salvo in President Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty. The early education program for low-income children supported their social, emotional, and physical needs and got them ready for elementary school. It drew high-profile supporters, including the president's wife, Lady Bird Johnson, and actor Gregory Peck.
Sadly, there are little children who are already headed for lives of frustration and misery. No one ever read them a story. taught them a nursery rhyme, showed them about colors, letters, and numbers. When they start school in the first grade, they'll be so far behind the others that they may never catch up.
In 1965, I was sitting on the porch of our little shotgun shack in Ames, Texas, with my mother, and a woman approached the house. She introduced herself and told my mother that she was representing a new program called Head Start.
Darren Walker's mother signed him up in the program's inaugural year, and he recently shared his story at a gathering of supporters and alumni from around the country hosted by the National Head Start Association.
Head Start changed my life. It allowed me to begin to imagine, to think about the world outside of my environment, and to think creatively about what my life might be.
Today, Walker is president of the Ford Foundation, the nation's second largest private philanthropic group, which is a funder of the NewsHour. In honor of Head Start's 50th anniversary, the organization is paying for new research on early brain development in an effort to improve outcomes. Walker says the foundation has come full circle since it supported research in the 1960s that led to the creation of Head Start in the first place.
What we were interested in at Ford was how we could, at scale across America, have a program that would create an educational revolution, that would build a new social mobility escalator.
Isabel, do you have a toothbrush at home? You must no toothbrush.
The evidence is that it did some good when it was first introduced in very poor counties in the South. It's a different day.
Russ Whitehurst is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and has studied preschool programs extensively. He says even though it's an iconic program, evidence has revealed that Head Start's long-term outcomes are questionable. Whitehurst points to a 2010 study by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the 2014 follow-up report, which found almost no evidence of lasting impacts for Head Start children beyond the third grade.
They were not better readers. They were not doing math better. They did not have better social development. They did not have better health outcomes.
But the executive director of the National Head Start Association, Yasmina Vinci, says other factors should be taken into consideration when looking at that research.
Even when you're vaccinating, vaccinations do not last forever. You have to have a booster. And when our children don't go to schools that are well-funded and well-run and schools that are ready for them, they certainly do lose some of their advantage.
However, even the White House has acknowledged Head Start programs haven't always been pushed to do their best.
If a program wasn't providing kids with quality services, there was no incentive to improve. Under the new rule, programs are going to be regularly evaluated against a set of clear, high standards.
In 2011, President Barack Obama expanded accountability reforms introduced by George W. Bush, and this year has appropriated about $8 billion for Head Start services. Still, Russ Whitehurst says the program isn't meeting the needs of many low-income families. He believes they would be better served with vouchers to choose their own preschools, especially since many Head Start centers are open just a few hours a day. Numbers proving Head Start success are hard to come by, but the program supporters say they know it's changed many lives.
We see the children who are now, graduating from high school and getting the scholarships, staying in school, not dropping out of high school.
I remember that I started to learn to read, and that I would read to my mother when I came home, and she was so proud of me. And it was one of those moments that I learned that when I did well in school, my mother would be proud of me.
Back in Maryland, Lisette Steinwald's class continues their exploration of salad, taste testing a variety of ingredients. Raise your hand if you like lettuce more than carrots, because we're going to count. All right, 1, 2, 3 and a half. And at the end of the day, Ziriana Barasarte is happy to share all the things she learned in her morning at Head Start.
I learned how to make salad, how to read, and how to sing songs.
Ziriana's mother, Zuela Barasarte, who is deaf, says the program has been good for her daughter.
She's learning a lot of vocabulary from the teacher. She's learning listening skills. She's learning how to share.
Just a few of the outcomes Head Start was originally created to nurture.
See?
I'm April Brown for the PBS NewsHour in Silver Spring, Maryland.
Now to our series of interviews with the men and women running for president in 2016. Tonight, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, an independent seeking the Democratic nomination. Welcome to the NewsHour, Senator Sanders.
Great to be with you.
So you are an independent. You call yourself a Democratic socialist. How is that different from being a Democrat?
Well, I've been in the Democratic caucus in the Senate for over 24 years, but as an independent, my views, in fact, are a little bit different than many of my Democratic colleagues. I worry very much that we have a billionaire class now, which has enormous power not only over our economy, but over our political system as well, as a result of Citizens United Supreme Court decision. So my own view is that we have got to be very, very bold in taking on big money and creating a situation where government begins to work for the middle class and working families of our country rather than just the wealthy and the powerful.
So that's the main difference that you would make. Why are you running for president?
Judy, I'm running for president because, in my view, this country today, our country, faces more serious problems than in any time since the Great Depression. And if you throw in the planetary crisis of climate change, it may well be that the problems today are more severe. Look, for the last 40 years, the great middle class of this country has been disappearing. Median family income today is significantly less than it was in 1999. Millions of people are working longer hours for lower wages. And at the same time, we have seen a huge shift of wealth to the top 1/10 of 1%. So today, 99% of all new income is going to the top 1%. The top 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. That is immoral and unsustainable.
Well, and speaking of that, I want to ask about one of the issues is taxes. You've talked about raising the capital gains rate and the tax on dividends for the top 2%. In fact, you've talked about, I think, nearly doubling it. Critics say that is going to put a big damper on job creation and on the growth of this economy.
Well, I know critics are often paid by large corporations or corporate think tanks. The fact of the matter is, right now in America, we're losing about $100 billion every single year because very profitable corporations are stashing their money in the Cayman Islands, Bermuda, and other tax havens, and that has got to end. Second of all, we have a situation where hedge fund managers, guys who are making many, many millions of dollars a year, are paying an effective tax rate lower than when nurses or school teachers are paying. And Warren Buffett makes the point that his effective tax rate as a multi-billionaire is lower than his secretary's. That has got to end. The wealthiest people in this country are, in fact, going to have to stop paying their fair share of taxes if I'm elected president.
Another issue is trade. You've been very critical of the trade bill President Obama is vigorously pushing. Hillary Clinton, your rival, has not yet taken a position on this. Today, just today, CBS News reported that she has taken $2.5 million in speaking fees from organizations that are promoting this trade bill. Is that a problem?
Sure, it's a problem. The problem that we have now is that our political system is increasingly dominated by a billionaire class and by super PACs who have unbelievable influence over what goes on.
That's how y'all stay on top.
But in terms of this trade agreement, in my view, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement is a continuation of other disastrous trade agreements like NAFTA, CAFTA, and permanent normal trade relations with China. These trade agreements, among other things, have contributed to the fact that we have lost almost 60,000 factories since 2001 and millions of decent-paying jobs. And I think enough is enough. We have got to rebuild our manufacturing base, not send it to China or other countries.
Does it matter? We said Secretary Clinton has not taken a position. What does it mean if she doesn't take a position on this before the Congress votes?
Well, I mean, that's a very fair question. I think the American people will have to decide. If you are asking me why it is that the middle class is disappearing, and we are seeing more income and wealth inequality than any time since the 1920s. Trade is a very important factor in that, not the only reason. And it is hard for me to understand how any serious candidate for president, Hillary Clinton or anybody else, can duck this issue. You can't. You could be for it, you could be against it. But it is being hotly debated right now in Congress. You got to have a position on it.
In this race, you are going up against someone who is literally part of a political juggernaut in this country, in Secretary Clinton. Why do you think you'd be a better president than she would be?
I have spent the better part of my adult life standing up and fighting for working families. I have taken on virtually every element of the big money establishment, whether it is the Koch brothers and the big energy companies, whether it's the military-industrial complex, whether it is Wall Street. You're looking at the guy who has introduced legislation to break up the largest financial institutions in this country. I've taken on the drug companies. I've taken on the insurance companies. I happen to believe that we should move to a Medicare for all, single-payer system, similar to what other countries around the world have. So I think if people understand that establishment politics just no longer is working, that we need some bold ideas, that we need a mass movement of people, millions of people, to stand up and say, you know what, enough is enough. This great country belongs to all of us and not just to a handful of billionaires. If people believe that, I'll win this election.
And you're saying she can't do that?
I don't think she can, yes.
One other thing I want to ask you, Senator, about foreign policy. ISIS, they just achieved a major victory in Iraq in taking over a big city, Ramadi, over the weekend. You have said you don't think the U.S. should be leading the charge against ISIS. Does that mean that raids like the one that took place last week, where the U.S. took out one of the top ISIS leaders, and the ongoing airstrikes in Syria and Iraq should not go on?
No. I have supported those efforts on the part of the president. I voted against the war in Iraq, and I think if you go back and you read what I had to say way back when, you know, it will sound pretty prescient in terms of the destabilization that we have seen in the Middle East. So my view is the United States has got to play an active role in defeating this barbaric organization. But at the end of the day, it's going to be the Muslim countries themselves, supported by the United States and other Western countries, that will defeat ISIS and bring some degree of stability into the Middle East. It cannot be American troops on the ground. And I'll tell you what I worry about. I think too many of my Republican friends are into perpetual warfare in the Middle East, and that scares the bejesus out of me.
So the raid last week that took out the ISIS leader, you
I supported the airstrikes as well, but I do not want to see perpetual warfare in the Middle East. I do not want to see American combat troops on the ground in the Middle East.
Senator Bernie Sanders, candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination. We thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now to our weekly analysis of the politics and the politicians driving the national debate. It's Politics Monday with Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report and Tamara Keith of NPR. We just listened to Senator Sanders just now. Tamara, what do we think? Is there room on the stage for an alternative to Hillary Clinton, whose name is Bernie Sanders?
Well, I think there are a lot of Democratic activists who would like an alternative. They don't, Democrats on the whole are anti-establishment types, at least some of them are, especially the kind who get involved in the caucuses in Iowa, and they don't really want to be told, well, here's your option. And so there are a lot of people who are flirting with Bernie Sanders, like the idea of Bernie Sanders, they like what he has to say. And so I think that there are a lot of people who are into this. I don't know, I don't exactly see what his path is.
Well, there's the path to victory and then the path on the messaging, which if listening to Judy's interview with Bernie Sanders, he was saying a lot of things that, boy, we've been hearing from Hillary Clinton a lot, right?
So today, Secretary
fact.
Clinton was talking about income inequality and using almost the same language.
Talking about hedge fund managers, making more than all the teachers and billionaires, and the deck is stacked, which is an Elizabeth Warren-ism that she's now using. So she's clearly on economic issues. I don't know that there's that much room in terms for somebody like Bernie Sanders to outflank her. I think where her problem points are with a lot of these liberal Democrats will be on the trade issue, though likely will be over by the time we hit Iowa, and really on foreign policy. I mean, that's really going to be the question for somebody like a Sanders or Martin O'Malley to really get to Hillary Clinton on questions of not only what did she do in 2003 on the vote for the war in Iraq, but what about now, and what about her time as Secretary of State?
Which brings us to who's going to ask those questions. What about now? Tamara, you had a good piece this week on the radio about Hillary Clinton's question taking, which is to say, not very much. She doesn't. Well, first of all, tell us what you found when you looked to see how many questions she's taken since she's been a candidate.
So she had another event today, and she did not take any questions from reporters, so we can keep the numbers the same. She has taken 13 questions that she has answered. Some of those included, how are you feeling? And some things along the lines of, how awesome is Iowa? Well, not exactly, but close. But close. And her campaign feels like this is the ramp-up phase where it's not about her answering questions, it's about her hearing from people, and that's what they're pushing. And guess what? There aren't a lot of consequences. Most of the reaction I got to my story was like, hey, reporter, stop whining.
So, Amy, is that right?
Is
that a pretty good bet, that it's not worth it for reporters to press?
I mean, this is definitely inside baseball. This is definitely the sorts of things where voters say, you know what, this is stuff reporters care about, not anybody else. At the same time, it is turning into an issue that Republicans are using, too, to bang Hillary Clinton across the head with, saying, you know, see, this is just part of the theme around her. She has a secretive email server. She has secretive donors to the Clinton Global Foundation. She has this imperial sense around her that she's better than us, or she can play by different rules. That becomes problematic. Answering questions, Tamara's right, she doesn't need to answer every question, but if this starts to really develop that she's just now seems out of touch, it's
well, let's flip this on its head, because last week we saw what happened when Jeb Bush does answer questions.
Right. Yes.
And he didn't have a good week because he kept coming up with different versions of his answers, and he gave people some room to run against him. So is maybe Hillary Clinton have a point that it doesn't pay at this stage to make yourself too open?
And she's not competing against 19 other people. And Jeb Bush, the people who would defend him will say, well, at least he was answering questions. But gosh darn it. If there's one question that Jeb Bush has to answer, it is about the Iraq War, and he really struggled with it. It was a real problem and sort of pointed to all of that sort of family baggage that he's trying to get away from.
You know, what struck me is he said at one point, part of his answer was, I don't need to answer these hypotheticals. And we heard Mike Huckabee say, I don't have to defend everything I've ever done, when he was asked about something he tried to, a diabetic medication he used to peddle. And you think to yourself, well, isn't running for president a hypothetical? Is that the whole point?
Everything that you do, it's hypothetically something really bad could happen. How are you going to respond to it? I think the best way for these candidates to respond to it is to say, okay, this has already happened. We know that. Let's stop trying to parse around hypothetically what would happen if X, Y, or Z had happened. But now what are we going to do going into the future? And I think that's the bigger problem, quite frankly, for all of these candidates. Look, Iraq is a mess. The Middle East is a mess. We've been pointing fingers now for the last few years, the parties have, between it was Bush's fault, it's Obama's fault. Now the candidates have to come up with what is your plan going forward. I think that's what voters want to hear, and they're not really interested in whose fault it was that it's such a mess.
We started this conversation talking about whether there is room on the left for the Bernie Sanders of the world to run against the Hillary Clintons of the world. Is there a lot of room on the right for Republicans like Rand Paul or Marco Rubio to take down Jeb Bush, if he is considered still to be the front runner?
I think Jeb Bush has this big target on himself, but these other candidates are finding plenty of lane, and it's really unclear. Jeb Bush at some point is going to say he's officially running for president and he's going to have this amazing amount of money, but it's unclear whether he's going to have the excitement of voters or whether these other folks who are officially running are going to be able to just keep beating him up until then.
Well, and this is what's fun about this race, honestly, which is you have so many candidates, they're very qualified, and they have so many different positions. This is not, one sort of monolithic group singing from the same book. They have many, they have many different positions, which is really the big question for Republicans in 2016. Who is going to be able to unite all these many voices into one focused voice going into the general election? This is really a crossroads election for the Republican Party, who they are, what they stand for, do they have a positive message going forward? I think this primary process is going to be good for them.
If we can fit them all on the debate stage.
That's a problem.
Panorama.
Amy Walter and Tamara Key, thank you both very much.
Thanks.
Finally tonight, social media as a public shaming tool. Jeffrey Brown has the latest from the NewsHour bookshelf.
In December 2013, a young woman named Justine Sacco wrote this tweet: "Going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS, just kidding, I'm white." She hit send, and out it went to her 170 followers.
She got on the plane, turned off her phone, woke up 11 hours later, turned on her phone, and discovered that her life was utterly destroyed.
She was a Twitter sensation.
The worldwide.
In the worst way.
In the worst way. It was like, hundreds of thousands of tweets along the lines of, we're about to get this woman fired in real time before she even knows she's being fired.
The blitz of online outrage did indeed lead Sacco's company to fire her. She said later she thought she was making a joke about her own privilege. But that's not how the Twitterverse heard it. Sacco's story is just one of many told in the new book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed. The author is John Ronson, a man who knows his way around Twitter. He has 112,000 followers and has sent out more than 45,000 tweets himself.
We're in a renaissance of public shaming, you're right, brought about by social media and the internet.
Yes. Brought about by this sort of weird approval machine that is social media. So we start to kind of, we uncover a transgressor, sometimes by just like some inappropriate phraseology in some tweet, and then we pile in on that person. And because we surround ourselves on social media by people who feel the same way we do, we just mutually approve each other as we carry on tearing that person apart.
One of the things that you're writing about, I mean, on the one hand, we all have something we want to hide, or at least that we don't want coming out public, right? On the other hand, now we have this technology that allows everything to come out. And it comes out in the nastiest ways, and often enough, even about relatively small things.
Yeah. It's so interesting you say that, because this is what's happening. We are destroying people routinely, daily, and destroying them with the thing we are most terrified would happen to us. We all of us have bubbling away within us something that we're just terrified would destroy our reputation if it came out. And yet we are doing exactly that to other people.
In other words, public shaming, once meted out in the stocks in the town square, is now carried out in the new town square of social media. Ronson tells of numerous cases, well-known ones like writer Jonah Lehrer, who was caught for embellishing and fabricating parts of his stories, and lesser-known tales like Lindsay Stone's, who was fired from her job after posting what she thought was a funny photo of herself making a vulgar gesture at Arlington National Cemetery. The stories can be harrowing and complicated, affecting both shamee and shamer.
I wrote about a man called Hank who just whispered a slightly Beavis and Butthead type sexist joke to the guy sitting next to him at a conference about big dongles, and the woman sitting in front overheard it and, with unbeknownst to them, photographed them, posted it on Twitter with a comment, not cool, jokes about big dongles right behind me. And the next day he was fired from his job. And then as revenge, she was just destroyed. She had 2 years of rape threats and death threats.
We're in early days of social media, right? Do you think all this is sort of the immaturity, so to speak, or the early period, and that we would grow out of it?
I think people will grow out of it. I think right now we're like, with social media, we're like toddlers crawling towards a gun. And I hope and think that my book's going to contribute to that, because my book is like a visit to the slaughterhouse. I journey...
A visit to the slaughterhouse?
Yeah, I journey around the world going into the homes of people who were destroyed as a result of, of the hitherto unempowered people having power and not working out how to use it judiciously, and they're crushed. It mangles them.
I'm wondering how you see your role as an investigative but participant. You even write in the book about having sort of, as a journalist, participated in shaming in a sense, right?
And I'm very glad that I'm not doing this anymore.
I'm a reformed shamer.
I'm a reformed shamer. There's social media is like this stage for constant artificial high dramas. Everybody's either a magnificent hero or a sickening villain. But that isn't true about human beings. We're dimensional. And you know what? The cure for being cast out is being brought back in with compassion and empathy. And my book is really a call for people to be more empathetic.
So you've been publicly shamed. John Ronson, thanks so much.
Thank you.
On the NewsHour online. If you know who Don Draper is, then you're probably among those who were on hand for the series finale last night of Mad Men. It got us to thinking. It was a great water cooler show, but where does it rank among television's greatest? We asked a few critics to name their top 5 shows of all time. You can see their answers and share your own on our website, pbs.org/newshour.
Tune in later this evening on Independent Lens, how a group of ordinary citizens broke into an FBI office in 1971 to expose an illegal surveillance program. And on Charlie Rose, former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, on Iran, the Islamic State, and the challenges in the Middle East.
And that's the NewsHour for tonight. On Tuesday, we look at how some historically black colleges and universities are struggling to survive. I'm Gwen Eiffel.
And I'm Judy Woodruff. Join us online and again here tomorrow evening. For all of us here at the PBS NewsHour, thank you and good night.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by BNSF Railway,
Lincoln Financial, committed to helping you take charge of your life and become your own chief life officer.
And by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, supporting science, technology, and improved economic performance and financial literacy in the 21st century.
And with the ongoing support of these institutions.
And this program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. You're watching PBS.
Support for this program on the Community Idea Stations comes from our members in partnership with
Gates Antiques, offering grandfather clocks, sideboards, secretaries, chests, dining tables, chairs, art, and more. Full restoration services are available. Gates Antiques, serving Richmond since 1961.
Antiques Roadshow has a lot to share from our visit to Charleston, West Virginia.
To me, it's like eye candy that draws you in from across the room.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Thanks, Frank.
Frank's smiling somewhere, I'm sure.
I'm sure I am. You won't want to miss these discoveries next time on Antiques Roadshow.
5,000.
15,000.
Play along with the Antiques Roadshow Appraise It Yourself game. Really? Match wits with the experts during new episodes on Monday nights at 8, 7 Central, and 8 p.m. Mountain and Pacific. Good luck.
What if television could take us back in time, into the mind of a president?
This is our summer, Mr. Greatness.
And into the soul of a rebel. What if we could know how it feels to shoot for the stars, to witness the terrors of combat, and know the heartache of those left at home? And why can't TV remember the heroes we honored, the music we danced to, the dreams we chased?
The hope still lives, and the dream shall never die.
No one tells our nation's story like PBS. Give to your PBS station. and help bring America's story to life, now and for generations to come.
Support for this program on the Community Idea Stations comes from our members in partnership with
Edible Richmond Magazine, a celebration of local food dedicated to capturing the essence of the food movement bursting within Richmond and the surrounding communities. Details at ediblerichmond.com.
Lakewood Manor, a nonprofit continuing care retirement community in Richmond's West End, offering a carefree lifestyle that enables you to live what you love while making the most of your retirement. Learn more at lakewoodmanor.org.
Antiques Roadshow is visiting another great American city, sure to have lots of treasures, Charleston, West Virginia.
I'd ask the viewers out there, would you have this in your living room? It's probably going to stay in the family, isn't it?
Oh, yes, sir. My mother would kill me otherwise.
Check out some of West Virginia's best antiques and collectibles coming right up.
Now, the people who make Antiques Roadshow possible.
Grandma's favorite costume ring. Nickel and acrylic. Turns your finger green after every party. You wouldn't have it any other way.
Every heirloom tells a story. That's why Liberty Mutual is a proud sponsor of Antiques Roadshow.
Franklin Templeton Investments. Gain from our perspective.
And by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Antiques Roadshow. Hi, I'm Mark Wahlberg in Charleston, West Virginia. It's our first visit to West Virginia, the 35th state to be added to the Union, and home of the Mountaineers. We're finding some fantastic treasures today in Charleston, the state capital. What's in front of our cameras now? Take a look.
Went to a local auction, just walked in and it caught my eye. They told us after the auction that it came out of a museum in Texas.
A museum in Texas,
yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know, that's all I know about it.
You bought this at auction about how long ago?
We purchased it probably 3 years ago.
It's a very exciting object visually. Lots of people have been walking by, and I have to say, almost no one can walk by without looking and having something to say about it, because it is such an over-the-top object. Horn chairs and horn furniture like this, the genesis of that style is in the late 19th century, in the 1870s, and really by the 1880s there was a great fad for this kind of furniture. And it was being made in Texas, as you might imagine, but also in St. Louis and Kansas and Chicago and even in Massachusetts. They were shipping these horns around because there was real popularity for it. It was really the time of the Wild West, and the object is very evocative of that kind of feeling. Where does it live in your house?
Our home's very eclectic, so it just fits right in.
Okay.
Very eclectic.
So you don't have a Western theme?
No theme.
Okay. Well, the horns are steer horns. Originally, these often had cowhide seats, but also different kinds of fabric seats. You've got leather on here. It's sort of a fun mix of faux alligator in a couple different colors, deerskin here, and lots of steer horns. Now, is it comfortable? Do you sit in it?
Yes, it is actually. We do use it.
Do you?
Yes, yes. There are actually 4 other horn chairs, and we use it as like a dining set.
Oh, that's great.
So it's fun.
Okay. Have steak probably. So I guess there's good news and bad news here in a way. The good news is you bought a terrifically eye-catching, snappy object, and in the market right now, the things that people gravitate to are things like this that have great visual appeal and great presence. But the piece itself is not very old. It could well have come from a museum in Texas, but I don't know if it would be a museum in quotes, I think. I think it was made probably in the last 20 or 30 years.
Okay.
I've never seen a period chaise or settee like this. They could have made them, but chairs were really the most popular form. Now, what did you pay for it?
I think we paid $3,000 maybe.
Okay. Okay, well, I think at auction I would expect it to have an estimate maybe in the $2,000 to $3,000 range.
Okay.
But I think the good news here is you paid a fair price and you got a terrific object that everybody sort of gravitates to.
Yes.
And I've had 10 people come up and say, are you going to go on camera with that? And, you know, I'd ask the viewers out there, would you have this in your living room? And I've asked a lot of people that. People have said yes, some have said no, but everybody has had an opinion. I think it's a great object.
It's a fun piece. We'll enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had a neighbor who worked for a company that produced movie posters. He was 92 at the time that he died, and he had no children, and so his sister-in-law knew that I was his buddy and asked me if there was anything of Frank's that I would like, and these were in his attic, and that's what I thought they were kind of cool.
Well, I think they're really cool. I mean, apart from the obvious, they're all of Marilyn Monroe, which is why I got excited when I saw them. They're film stills, and the ones that you find in shops today, they're reprinted and reprinted and reprinted, and so they're so far from the originals, and every one that you have here is a pristine, crisp, clean, shiny original. We have 5 different things represented here. We have a set from The Prince and the Showgirl, which is complete. They came in sets of 12 when they released these color images. That's the one on the top closest to you, and the rest of them are down here in that stack. So complete set of 12, we have 9 of the 12 bus stop images. Then we have on this stack, which is the one closest to me, what Fox Studios put out at the time, which was kind of what I call the omnibus. It was her greatest hits. It was all of the most wonderful movies Marilyn's done for Fox, and they were trying to publicize her, and so they sent out this stack of 20. There were some shots from all of her great movies. The stack in the center are the glamour shots, or I call them. They came as a set of 10, and you have the complete 10. And the far side is a complete set of 20 black and white film stills from the movie Bus Stop.
They have numbers on them,
Yep.
And what is that?
These numbers, the one that I'm looking at says 56/343. That's actually a number that's put out by the National Screen Service. It's a regulatory body that decides if the promotional materials for a film that have been prepared by the studio are approved. This means in 1956, which is the first number, this was the 343rd film that was approved for its ad campaign. So all of these will have that number, and you can date them that way. We know this set came out in 63, and so in 63 they were putting out her greatest hits up until that point in her career. We'll see dates on every single one of these that'll correspond to when the studio put out these publicity images. How long ago was it that you acquired these from the attic?
About 15 years ago.
So for 15 years
I've been curious.
So the most interesting thing to me about these, it's not been until probably the past 10 years that collectors have really started to value these original vintage prints, and they're doing quite well at auction. So in today's market, I would expect them to perform very well, and for your purposes, if I were you, I would insure them for between $18,000 and $20,000.
Thanks, Frank.
Frank's smiling somewhere, I'm sure.
I'm sure I am.
And they're just stunning. They're pristine.
So here we have an artist with strong ties to Charleston, but not West Virginia.
South Carolina.
South Carolina.
Elizabeth O'Neill Verner was born in Charleston, spent most of her life living there. Her family, when she was a young teenager, sent her to Philadelphia, to the Philadelphia Fine Arts Academy to study art. But she came back to Charleston. Her original medium was etchings, and it was in 1938 she started doing pastels.
You've done your homework. I'm impressed.
Thank
You're pretty
you.
proud of a job. I'm going to correct you on one thing. It would be the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in Philadelphia. I didn't know that because I work nearby, which is the oldest established art school in the United States, a famous institution, and a lot of our leading artists went there, including Elizabeth Verner.
Yes.
And she studied with Anschutz there.
That's
who's
correct.
one of the leading painters at that time and a very influential teacher. And you mentioned about the pastels, and she started working with pastel after seeing an exhibition by Laura Coombs Hill in Boston, in Massachusetts, and she was another great artist. It's a very difficult medium to master. I used to try, and I wasn't very good at it. And it's a very fugitive medium too. It's very easy to get smudged, but she really did a fantastic job, I think.
Well, she's won quite a number of awards. It has a South Carolina award named after her that is still presented.
And of course, although she had close ties to Charleston, and she was renowned to have said, I have two great loves in life, one is art and one is Charleston, I've managed to combine both into one profession. She had very strong ties, but she was no way parochial, so she went off to Philadelphia, she studied at the Central School in London, she went to Mexico, she travelled Europe, she went to Japan and learned Japanese art. And this is an example, one of her nice pastels, of one of the flower ladies who you would find in Charleston. And
still do.
Except the mayor at one point tried to get rid of them. And she was in the forefront of the people who said, no, that's not going to happen. She stopped that happening because these were also her models. Her husband had died, not long.
Both husbands died, one in 25 and one in 35.
But she really had to make money, so she needed to be a career artist. And one of the avenues that she explored was doing these flower ladies. What I love about this drawing is that it shows great warmth, affection and dignity. It's not patronising in any way. There's a real sensitivity about the way she's depicted the flower lady's face. And as I say, it's just a lovely study of one of the ladies there, and great colour as well. There's great energy and liveliness in the line. So it's a nice example of her work, I think. How did you come by it?
My sister-in-law and my mother-in-law purchased it in Charleston in 1968.
Charleston, South Carolina.
Charleston, South Carolina. They paid $1,600 for it.
Okay.
Some years later, my niece needed to go to law school. And so my husband and I paid $5,000 for it.
And how long ago was that, do you think?
That had to be at least probably 20 years ago.
Okay. These days, I mean, there's a lot of demand for work. I think at auction, you'd probably double that. So for an auction value or estimate, I would suggest $10,000 to $15,000. I think that would be a comfortable range.
A friend of mine was settling his parents' estate, and he knew I liked antiques, and so he invited me to come in and pick what I wanted. And I just loved it on sight, but I got some other things too, but I really like this teapot. I like spongeware, and I have some pieces of blue. I've never seen yellow. I've seen green and red.
Well, let's talk a little about what it is. It's a coffee pot, by the way. It was made in England, in Staffordshire, in the Midlands of England. Probably around the time of the Civil War, I would say around 1860. And you mentioned spongeware, which is a variety of decoration. This one we would call spatterware, which is a little different from spongeware, but they're both techniques basically designed to decorate pottery inexpensively and quickly to kind of maximum effect. This type of thing was made in England, but exclusively really for the export market, and particularly to the United States export market. You don't see many of them after the end of the 19th century, and they're mostly limited to the middle or the third quarter of the 19th century. How long ago did you buy it?
About 15 years ago.
Okay, and may I ask what you paid for it at the estate?
Because I bought other things together, I think my bill was $42, $46, and I think this had $10 on it, I think.
$10?
Yes.
Okay. This is what we call, by the way, rainbow spatterware. And rainbow spatterware is perhaps the rarest and certainly the most desirable of all the varieties of spatterware. And there isn't much of it around today. One reason being, I think, that this was originally an inexpensive object and people used it and didn't necessarily treasure it or look after it. But this one survived rather nicely. There is a little bit of staining here, just a tiny bit of staining, and a tiny little chip on the spout, as you would expect. But this is in great condition, most things. Well, I think your $10 investment has gone a long way. We all believe that if it came to auction, The low estimate would be about $3,000. And the high estimate could be as much as $5,000.
Such a nice little thing. So pretty, I love it, but that's nice to know too. I didn't think that.
Well, I got these hats at the Greenbrier Resort at Weisstoffer Springs, West Virginia. When I worked there about 8 years, from 1994 to around 2005. And during that time, they was remodeling Sam Snead's shop, and the ladies that was redoing it in there gave me these hats.
And did you know Sam Snead?
Yes, I did. Most generally, anytime you seen Sam, he had one of those hats on.
So you have two great pieces of history here. Sam Snead won his first professional tournament at the Greenbrier in 1936. He was a pro golfer for 5 decades, and he won 82 tournaments. These hats were made for him. It says right here, made exclusively for Sam Snead. And this one is signed by him. Now, you want to know value. In 2013, the estate of Sam Snead, he sold a number of his hats. The other auctions that have sold Sam Snead hats like this have sold between 200 and 600 apiece. And the ones that were sold at the estate of Sam Snead sold for 1,000 to 1,500 apiece. Wow. So, Pete, here's what we're going to do. We're going to split the difference between them, and I would place an insurance value of the two hats for $1,000.
Well, that's good. That's real good.
Do you wear them?
No. No, I have stuck it on my head, but no, I've never worn them. Okay.
This comes from my in-laws' estate. They were downsizing several years ago and left a lot of things that they didn't want anymore. And it appealed to me, just appealed to my heart. I just really liked it. So I don't know much about it other than it just appeals to me.
Well, it is beautiful, and it is a really great example of this artist's work. So it immediately caught my eye, too. This is a piece by an artist, Jean Kloss. Jean Kloss is a woman.
Why the changing of the name to a man's name?
Well, she was a sort of bohemian artist. I think she wanted to not be judged as a woman. That might have been part of it. As an artist working in the 20s, she moved to New Mexico from Oakland, California. She was born in 1904 and established herself as an artist as a young woman. She was a trailblazer. She had a career as a painter and moved to New Mexico, to Taos in the 20s. And she is known for doing things just like this. This is a wonderful example of her work. And what we're looking at is an etching, an aquatint by the artist. It's atmospheric and has this wonderful chiaroscuro, dark shadows, and that's the result of her printmaking technique. Etched lines are the lines that define the Pueblo outline. And the aquatint is this beautiful gradations of this dark umber, but it really gives it the look and the feel.
The feel, right.
Exactly, exactly. She's signed here, lower right, Jean Kloss. It's a typical signature. And here on the left, you can see the title, Indian Pueblo. Indian Pueblo, of course, is what we see here, and it's set in the mountains of New Mexico. This is from the early 30s. She had a long career. She worked into
And worked her whole life?
Yeah,
Oh,
50s,
gosh.
60s, 70s. She's really one of the best-known New Mexican artists.
Oh.
Really capture the feel and the richness of the mountain landscape. I don't know if you've been to New Mexico?
Well, my in-laws went to the University of New Mexico. So I don't know if that plays into it, but it may be what drew them to this. But I have been to New Mexico, but briefly.
Well, likely they picked it up at a gallery in New Mexico at the time because she had a very successful career and her work is very sought after. So this is a quintessential Jean Kloss print of New Mexico that is very scarce. This has only come to auction once before. So at auction, you could see prices estimated at $4,000 to $6,000.
Oh, gosh. Well, I feel good that I appreciated it, and apparently I'm not the only one.
This was homemade by a great uncle of mine back around in the early 1900s from 23 different pieces of wood was a legend. He gave it to my grandfather in 1920, and my grandfather played it for years. He played by ear, but he could play any instrument, and he loved playing this old banjo.
So do you actually remember him playing it?
I do, yeah.
And what kind of, were they playing old time?
They played a lot of bluegrass, and he loved Christian music. It's kind of like the old Southern Baptist type music.
The main woods I see are pine in the body, I see walnut in the neck, I see cherry with those diamonds in the neck.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody made this and gave it to your grandfather?
Uh-huh. Yeah, his uncle, my great uncle, gave it to him.
And your great uncle made it earlier than that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Was this made by your relatives in West Virginia?
No, they actually lived in Kentucky at that time.
The thing that I want to talk about is how people like your great uncle did things like this, and they would take what was really designed to be a utilitarian object, and then they turn it into a piece of folk art, a thing of beauty that 100 years later, a guy like me gets excited because it's got the inlay, it's got all these little diamonds tacked on it. He didn't just do it on the front, he did it on the back too.
Yeah.
Put the little heart cutouts in the back, and it probably gave it a little bit of a more sort of resonator sound. So is this your grandfather's information there?
Yeah, that's my grandfather.
Well, and you can tell it's all done with things that your great uncle would have had around there, like these big tacks like you see, big tacks like that on upholstery. And then everything else was carved by hand. This is a wonderful thing, and it doesn't matter really if it's playable or not. To me, it's like eye candy.
Yeah.
You know, whenever I see things like this, great folk art or anything like a painting or whatever, when you look at it, it draws you in from across the room.
Yeah.
And that's what this does. Now, where do you have it in your house?
I actually have it in a kind of nestled in a basket where it won't have anything rubbing on it and stuff.
But you've got it out where you can see it.
Yeah.
Your grandfather put 1920 on the back of it, so it could be as early as the late 1800s, maybe 1900, which is really good. I think a value for this retail would be $3,000 or $4,000.
Oh, now that's great.
Probably going to stay in the family, isn't it?
Oh, yes, sir. Yes. My mother would kill me otherwise. To me, it says love, so I want it to be seen.
Well, my father was the commander with the National Chinese Army. He was the American advisor, and he was the commander of the offshore islands of Matsu and Quemoy. They lived in Kaohsiung, my mother and dad did. When he arrived there, he went to an antique store, and this plaque was there. Well, 2 years later, he went back, and he brought the plaque and brought it back home with him, and I've inherited it from him.
And when did your father purchase this?
Probably